Welcome to the Simpleton Podcast, the strangest new podcast on planet Earth.
Hi, Clark.
Welcome back, Laura Heeman.
Thank you, Clark Massey.
Where you been all this time?
Well, this past weekend, I went to Kansas City, Missouri for a few days.
Oh, that's nice. You probably visited my family.
I did.
Well, you're getting ahead of us, Laura. We got to do a breakdown, a signpost to this episode so people know where we're going. We're going to start out with housekeeping, where we will talk about Laura's visit to Kansas City and the great anniversary party we had here and many other things. Then we're going to talk about, all right, by the way, there's so much we're going to try to talk about this episode that I almost don't want to signpost because it's almost unrealistic, the ground we're going to try to cover. Here we go. We're going to talk about a critique we got from a listener and an update on the Baltimore Attorney General's report. We're going to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion at the University of Michigan. Very short segment, but kind of interesting. We're going to talk about state laws and the banning of transgender care, and particularly the saga of Zooey Zephyr, the Montana legislature. What do you call it if you're a legislative member?
Legislator? Yeah.
Legislator. Yep. Just what you need to know on that. I think a lot of people just read the headlines, and there's a few facts that are kind of interesting in there that deserve talked about. All right. We're also going to talk about how the U.S. government is managing kids at the border and whether or not the U.S. government is actually trafficking the kids. We're going to have the 0% conspiracy analysis of Jeffrey Epstein. This is where you come for no conspiracy Jeffrey Epstein analysis. It's kind of crazy enough without a conspiracy. Then we're going to talk about whether or not the intelligence community is making America like Star Wars, and the right to privacy and the youth, and which is where we're going to partly ask you, the audience, for suggestions on this. And we're going to also talk about how to manage the unmanageable that is happening in our society right now. It has to do with AI, big pharma, and things like that. So if that does not scare you, please keep listening.
Yeah, basically this became an episode about oversight, kind of by accident.
Right, that's kind of the thread here is oversight. Mm-hmm. All right, but before we get to that thread, we had the anniversary party in Kansas City. Well attended. We estimate attendance at about 300. What did you think of the party, Laura?
It was great. It was good. People had
Special
fun.
Thanks to Bishop Johnston and Abbot Benedict from Conception Abbey. Yeah,
Bishop Johnston gave a very beautiful homily. It was great. Lots of people I hadn't seen. So, yeah, good success.
What you really cared about on the DC party was how was the food?
The food was good at you guys. So I thought the food at the DC party was good. The pasta was a mistake. You guys skipped the pasta and the food was great. Food was good. Okay. Yeah.
All right, you heard it from Laura.
Yeah.
It was good. All right. Let's talk about the purpose of this podcast. What was partly interesting about the anniversary party was having people come up and say they listen to the podcast, including seminarians, one in particular who loves the podcast. And we love that you love the podcast.
Thank you.
Sometimes I don't know how to take a compliment, and so it got awkward, but forgive us for that. All right. I want to say that we kind of from the beginning knew we were going to have two different types of podcasts, and by accident, we discovered a third, right?
Yeah.
So the two podcasts we were always going to do was we were going to explain things about Simple House, methodology, origins, like lessons learned from the Simple House kind of project and ministry, with the idea that should be help anyone else trying to do ministry. The other thing I think we knew from the beginning we were going to do was interviews, interesting people that we know that deserve to kind of like, let's flesh out some interesting things that are relevant to Catholicism and faith and life and spiritual life. The thing we've ended up doing that's been surprising, it's been surprising how successful it is. It's also surprising how it's kind of enjoyable to do. Is we're kind of a news podcast now. Like every 2 or 3 episodes, we're like, here's all the crazy things happening in the world.
Yeah.
We're getting good feedback on that. But I want to defend it at a different level. I think that we are at a flux point in civilization, and flux points seem to happen fairly frequently. Fall of communism would have been one, whatever. But like the way we understand where we are in the world, the U.S. government, what Catholics' roles are, all of that's been changing fairly fast, and a lot of people's heads are spinning. And you're hearing kind of some weird takes based on that. And I think that my goal is that can we just kind of sort a little bit with a Catholic eye a lot of the big issues of the day, like AI or corruption in government or the mystery of Donald Trump, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that this is worthwhile. And I also think it's worthwhile to not do every day and to not even do every week.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
I remember when I lived in DC, it's easy to surround yourself with complete political like nerds.
Yeah.
Right. And they love politics.
Yes.
Right. And they love talking about like what happened on the Senate floor and how it so matters and how the Democrats are now got the upper hand and blah, blah. And I remember someone saying something to the effect of, to the rest of the nation, none of this matters. Like it's got to be in DC news for a solid 2 weeks before anyone waking up in Utah will care enough to pay attention, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's true. It's actually like a waste of time to follow things that closely. And it's kind of like for political nerds, it's just fun. It's actually what they like to do.
Yeah.
You know? And I think that even when there's a natural disaster or a great crisis, I almost try not to watch the news. Because you end up just watching this loop where you're getting little updates, a lot of bad information because it's so new.
Yeah.
I almost like, can we just wait a month and then review what happened?
Yeah.
You know? So I think that that's a little bit our attitude towards this too. What are your thoughts, Laura?
Yeah, no, I think since we've known each other, you and I have spent a lot of time trying to kind of like figure out the world and people, you know, with new bits of information and observations and so I think I guess it shouldn't be such a surprise that we ended up here, but
well, I think there's also like a perspective we're bringing to it.
Yeah.
That's not just Catholic, but I want to kind of throw out here something for everyone to think about, that I think our approach to reality needs to be more of like a surfer than an engineer, right? Like the surfer doesn't pretend to control the wave. Right. He rides the wave or she rides the wave and does some things and has like certain little influence. Right.
Yeah.
But like doesn't design the wave, doesn't create the wave, doesn't sit around saying, wouldn't it be better if there were no waves or bigger waves or whatever. Right. And I think that when one of the problems that I see on the left and the right, like both in the church and out of the church, like if you look at like the left wing critiques of bishops or the right wing critiques of bishops, they're all kind of playing armchair quarterback and they're all kind of acting like you could reinvent the system if you wanted to.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's just kind of weird at the end of the day because these systems like the economy, the political system, so the sociological things that are going on in our society and even the church itself are so infinitely complex.
Yeah.
You know? And it doesn't mean that you can't think about it, but you're more like an environmentalist studying the environment than like someone laying out the roads of a city. Meaning like the environmentalist can say, hey, we discovered this new predator-prey relationship. It explains a few things.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I see conservatives and liberals like want to be the maker of the civilization as opposed to like accept that what we are is like riding a wave and influencing it.
Yeah. There's like, you know, like in psychology, like an idea, like you can't and should not try to control how other people act. You know, you can only control like your own reaction, you know? And
yes.
I think like that's sort of like where like the choice to be happy or not or whatever comes into play. But also, it reminds me of Father Adam's line, like, is this available reality to you? You know, and it's like you talk about how things should be, but are you actually making decisions about the world you live in and the circumstance you find yourself in? And it's interesting to want to do like a critique of like, well, the bishop said this or didn't say this or whatever, because it's always like the church should be doing more, blah, blah, blah. So what's your available reality? Are you a bishop? No. Okay. But you are part of the church. So what should you be doing? You know?
Right.
Yeah.
My wife probably hates that I mentioned her on the podcast, but she's been talking about this a lot. This like sphere of influence, control what you can, is also about prudence. Mm-hmm. You know, it's about like, that's just what, it's imprudent to be worried about a bunch of things that you can't control.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's why worry? What's the, gosh, it's like the you can't accomplish anything by worrying about tomorrow, you know,
right.
It's like scriptural.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. And it's very kind of enslaving. But what's kind of interesting is I've noticed that there's different ways that liberals and conservatives do this. So like if you're in a group of conservatives, there's always going to be scotch or cigars or pipes involved if they're true conservatives, you know, and I like these groups, whatever. Yeah. But the way it goes is you kind of like sit there and you're like, here's an enormous problem I read about in a book. Let's talk about this problem.
Yeah.
And you talk about the problem and then you're like, and there's nothing we can do. And so we will do nothing. And then you kind of like, you know, go home that night and you're fine. But like a group of liberals is kind of like, here's an enormous problem. Me doing something probably won't matter, but we will go about and we will all recycle and we will all do this and this and this. Even though we can't reverse global warming on our own, we will try and do our martyrdom best, you know? And they're both just kind of the same, like somehow the conversation is not as productive as it pretends to be. Mm-hmm. You know? Yeah. But all right. Yeah. That's where Laura and I come from, I guess. But, you know, part of this idea is like, you know, we've talked a lot about kind of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution and how that seems to be a turning point in civilization that greatly accelerates everything. Right. Yeah. And, you know, one of the thoughts is like, since then, in a previous podcast, I talked about different types of economists, that economists in the Western world were kind of studying the economy as if they were studying the environment. They're like, oh, that's interesting. That happened, you know, like as an outsider. Right. Whereas economists in like centrally planned regimes were actually being tasked with running the economy and planning it. Yeah. Right. And what we found is that when you actually do try to take hold of this modern civilization and plan it, you end up killing millions of people. Yeah. Just because it's that difficult. Right. Yeah. Like anyone who's like for changing all of our society right now needs to sit back and say, okay, how did it come about that we came to feed 8 billion? Yeah. You know, and let me not bother that, because it's a technology issue. It's a farming issue. It's a specialization issue. It's an international trade issue. It's a transportation issue. It's just this incredible thing. And it has to do with rights. It has to do with incentives. It has to do with capitalism. And it's like, it's very difficult to understand. It's almost creative chaos. But like, if you don't understand it, then you can't reorganize our society. Right. You know, and that's just food. Like there's a lot more than food going on, you know? Yeah. So it also reminds me that I've got a good friend who, after the BLM riots, he came and we were discussing what was going on. And he was like, you know, have you heard of community policing? And he would just describe this beautiful idea that somehow communities would self-police and you wouldn't actually need what we think of as police forces, right? And my reaction is that might work, you know? How about we give you guys like 4 square miles to do that in, but let's not do that to a major metropolitan area. Yeah. You know, like how about you work out the problems in 4 square miles, and if that works, let's give you 10 square miles, you know? But the dreamer doesn't want the 4 square miles to work out the problems in. They want a 3 million person population center. And it's like, can we not do those types of experiments? Like there's a hubris there that's just so wrong to think that you could just rethink everything on how to do it and that trust me on this. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Ready to go ahead? Mm-hmm. All right. Critique from a listener and update on the Baltimore report. All right, update on the Baltimore report. So we know that factually, the reality of the church sex abuse crisis came out in 2002. That's also when a reform started in the church. It seems to have worked. I think 2001 is when it came out. 2002 is a reform. The reform works. No one's really arguing about that. And yet still attorney generals 20 years later want to write reports on just the Catholic Church on this issue. The report came out. It suggested to repeal the statute of limitations. They did. And now the Baltimore Archdiocese is facing new suits after having already dealt with over 300 suits. Right. So these are people that somehow in the last 20 years couldn't or wouldn't bring forth a suit. But now that the political climate has changed and there's a new AG report, do. You know. All right. That's just the update. Now let's talk about what our listener said. We could read what they wrote or we could summarize it.
I'll just read it.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. As a public school parent in PG County, I was uncomfortable with the current child abuse in PG CPS being used as a rhetorical foil to contextualize historical child abuse in the church. I'm not sure that purely statistical compare and contrast seem fair. PG CPS has care of 130,000 students for 8 hours plus every day. If there are indeed effective reforms that the church has made in Maryland or elsewhere that have not been made in PG CPS or in public schools more broadly, I think the specifics of them should be more central to conversations where you are comparing and contrasting.
Okay, I like this critique. Like, why did we single out PG County? Laura and I don't have intimate knowledge of their systems for correcting child abuse. And there's a question of scale, whether or not we're really doing apples to apples.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. You want to talk first, Laura, or do you want me to go for it?
Yeah, I think maybe I would apologize, right? But I think I misrepresented an article in the episode we spoke about this, where I said, all these teachers had been dismissed, and the article was actually about how some of the teachers, a number of teachers, had been like put on leave for kind of frivolous or stupid procedural accusations that were not actually serious.
But the article also, like, I want to kind of defend our treatment a little bit. So there's a lot of valid critique in our listener, in what our listener is saying. But I think the defense would be, we kind of took that number, cut it down to say, what if only a small fraction of this was actually a true allocation? And then this would be huge. Yeah. Right. And I do think
the article said as much, that
the article was about 1 year and the Attorney General report is about over 50 years. Right. Yeah. So, and I think the Baltimore Archdiocese is bigger than people give it credit for. Like at this moment, the Baltimore Archdiocese is running 40 schools. Yeah. Right. And that's a small fraction of what they were running. I'm sorry, it's not a small fraction.
No, but it's
many of these schools closed in the last 30 years. Yeah. Right. And you also have to count all the retreat centers, all the camps, and all the parishes. Yeah. So it's not a 1-to-1 by any means, but if you're talking about 50 years of a very large organization or 1 year of an extremely large organization, I don't know that it was totally bad. Yeah. And one of the things, though, that is kind of interesting is we don't know what any particular public school district, how they're processing complaints on sex abuse. Yeah. But we do know a few things. We know that the church 20 years ago had a reform that worked, and there was a sea change moment. We're not aware of any sea change moment of change in public schools. Yeah, the church said we need to do, this is this is the American, like the United States, the church in the United States said we need a major reform. And for the most part, there was buy-in, and there was like kind of swift, not application, what's the word? Implementation. Yeah. We also know that some of the reforms we did, like trying to root out a homosexual subculture in seminaries, was part of the reform. You can't imagine that happening for public school teachers. But we also know that the Attorney General of Pennsylvania and the Attorney General of Maryland both think the reforms that the church did worked. Yeah. Now, we do have reason to believe that there has not been a reform in public schools due to an article you found, Laura.
Yeah. Well, I found multiple articles, but one that was at USA Today, written in 2022, claiming that they found 100 teachers who had been accused of their teaching. Their teaching licenses had been removed because of allegations of, sexual misconduct. And they had found other ways to get into the schools, not as teachers, but have access to students. And this
article was nationwide.
Yeah, this was a nationwide. So, yeah, this article also said that there had been I want to get this right because I said it wrong before. So right now, there's only a few states that have laws that require states to report the names of abusive teachers. And in 2015, Congress passed a law requiring states to ban school districts from secretly passing problem teachers to other jurisdictions. But 45 states have not instituted the ban on doing this. So the point is, a point is that it seems like schools are still shielding and shuffling around perpetrators.
Which is exactly what the bishops were accused of doing.
Yes. And I don't know how you do this reform in the public schools, but I think that is a specific reform that is needed. And I think the church now has, in this charter, this reform charter, how you report, sexual misconduct, both, to the police and the church. How do you deal with the perpetrators and removing from ministry or whatever? And also, how do you handle failed reporting?
There was another interesting fact you dug up about the 9.6% of students.
Oh, right. So this was okay. Yeah. So another thing I found out is that from my research, it seems like there have been no national studies trying to understand how serious the problem is in the public schools. And so this woman, an academic, did all this kind of cobbling together of different, reports. And so she put the number at 9.6. What she found was that 9.6% of students grades 8 to 11 report teacher abuse. But that was in 2000. Some articles I found also suggested that the problem is worse now because of phones. But yeah, so the point is a large percentage of students. I don't know PG County to be worse than any other county in there.
That's true. I think we've kind of gone beyond the listener critique at this point to just show that there is a big issue here that needs addressed. But I think what's interesting is that 9.6% number, the fact that there have not been studies is an issue. The fact that there's not attorney general reports on this is an issue. And it's weird that they're singling out the Catholic Church and not going into this. And also the 9.6 is the amount reported. Well, you go, well, that's an enormous number. Are those false reports? Yeah. But are there also real cases that are never reported?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We don't know it, but it takes an attorney general report to try to get to the truth of all this. It's suspicious that they're not writing those reports. Yeah.
So, and so it's not to excuse the church in any way or say, oh, it's not as bad because it's horrible, but it is weird to come, say, 20 years after this reform, we need to do this attorney general report. And I don't actually know exactly why. Do you know, why did they want to do them?
I think it's personal motivations. I don't think it's an event. I think it's I know that even here in Missouri that the attorney general was invited into the archives of the different dioceses to just look through everything. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, why are you doing this? Because they're not even looking for a lot of this stuff is past statute of limitations. Yeah. So now you have the attorney general investigating things that aren't even crimes. To suggest changes in law, I don't know. I'm kind of torn on whether or not that's productive or not. What's not productive is that it happens to the Catholic Church and no one else. Yeah.
That's the
main point. And so I feel like once again, we can refer everyone back to our church sex abuse crisis podcast that talk about the roots of the problem and the solutions and what seems to work well and doesn't work well. So I think we did that last summer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
Are you ready, Laura? Ready to go on to the next topic?
Let's go.
Okay. All right. We lost some energy there in the public school sex abuse
I
issue.
know, it's so sad. And it's like, I said that kind of flippantly. I didn't mean to. It's like depressing.
It is depressing,
yeah.
But we're also at this weird point in history right now where public schools are having a crisis of confidence.
Yeah.
And that's why across the nation, you're literally getting state level school voucher laws.
Yeah.
One just got passed in Iowa. One was passed last year in Missouri. And these aren't even the first ones. I know there's at least half a dozen other states that have these where literally they give school choice to kids and give you vouchers to go anywhere you want. And it's coming from the state.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's been a huge rise in homeschooling, like not religious people homeschooling. Right. Yeah.
And I think that the teachers unions took a big black eye during COVID because they advocated for some things that didn't appear to be in the best interest of students.
Yeah.
And I think there's also the CRT issue and the transgender issue that's destroying faith. But if right now at this political moment, if the scandal that happened to the church happened to public schools, I don't know what the future would be. You know what I mean? Like if they were also accused of massive sex abuse scandals and shifting of teachers.
Yeah.
I mean,
but they are being accused of that. That's the thing I don't understand. They are being accused of that.
My point is, if this became a front burner issue and attorney generals started going after the public schools when they're already down, you know what I mean? Public schools are already having a big problem of support right now, right? Like, what would happen? Like, would we get rid of public schools and make them all charter and then we can basically have a free market of schools? I just think like public schools are at a weak point right now that if the attorney generals went after them on this and massive lawsuits arose all across the nation that were similar to the lawsuits that attacked the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
What are we looking at here? Bunch of bankrupt school districts in the very least, right? Yeah. So like, you're right that the accusation's out there. I mean, we're making it on the Simpleton Podcast. What bigger platform could you be on? All right. Now let's go after the University of Michigan. All right. University of Michigan, one of the top 5, if top 3 public universities in America. This is a very short segment. I took the amount of money that they spend on diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is called investigative journalism on the Simpleton Podcast. It's over $18 million. And this does not account for like the money that supports the gender studies department. You know, it's actually called gender and health. I looked up the different department names there, or any of the other like micro departments that study particular identity type issues. If it's only the DEI staff, it comes out that every undergraduate at Michigan is paying $550 a year for the services being rendered by the DEI staff.
Okay.
Or going in on average debt to the tune of $550 a year for that.
So $2,200.
Yeah, without interest, $2,200 if you get a 4-year degree.
What do you think is the average debt
I looked
that they're
it up.
paying
The
off?
average debt they graduate with is about $35K.
Okay.
So, just put that in perspective.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that funds are fungible, so it's not totally that, but it's just like, couldn't those students find a better use for that money that enhance their education more?
Yeah. Or just not have had to pay off, that much debt.
Or couldn't we just what kind of amazes me though, is like, you could still have a DEI agenda without the staff. You could just have like the admissions department have a few like quotas or rules. Yeah. And that would be a DEI agenda in your, college supporting diversity without $18 million a year of staff salaries that you're paying and benefits to support DEI. So that's where colleges are at these days. And in the midst of this, a new article came out this last week saying that colleges condemn community colleges as a waste of time. I just passed over this article, but when I told you and Ryan about this article, you just kept chuckling. Yeah. And the fact that you kept finding it funny just made it for me. It was like, colleges, which are having an enormous crisis of confidence themselves these days as justifying their value, are condemning their main competition, the community college. They're condemning the affordable alternative to what they're offering. All right. Having said that, we all support Catholic University, and that's where all our children will be going. But for real, no, there are colleges that these critiques don't land on and should be supported.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Next section. There's been a lot of action at the state level. We've mentioned the school voucher laws. There's also this banning of gender medical treatments. And there's also all the abortion laws that are getting passed at the state level. Yeah. I think this is kind of cool because it seems like state level politics, I think, has always been kind of underrated, the importance of it. Yeah. And now it seems to be more important than ever. And everyone's recognizing it. And it's like national news. Like, here's what different states are doing. All right. We're going to study one state. We're going to study Montana, particularly their gender-affirming care bill, because they had a scandal around it that should be talked about. But let's talk about what this bill is. Before we read the bill, Laura and I were discussing this, like gender-affirming care could be a lot of things. It could be like medical procedures, or it could just be like calling someone by their preferred pronouns, allowing cross-dressing, parents that encourage this type of behavior, stuff like that, right? So what is gender affirming care when they ban it? Are they banning the cross-dressing, which, I mean, frankly, historically has been illegal at certain times in history and things like this? But, or are we banning, like, by the way, the subtext in this is like, how bad have we lost control of language that this is called gender affirming care? You know, it just seems like there's this whole like group of dictionary people who like create words that favor one side. Like the idea that pro-life never gets mentioned when discussing abortion.
Yeah. Know? Well, and it's interesting because if you had no cultural context, like you could have no idea what gender affirming care is. You know, you could think 100%. It was the opposite of what it is, you know.
And by the way, I want to say I read the bill and we're going to get into that, but like the bill actually does allow, like, for hermaphrodite type issues that people can get these medical treatments. It's just people who don't have the hermaphrodite issue, they're not allowing it. All right. So, because that would also be gender affirming care in one way or the other, you know? So, all right. So, like, because like an example here is like historically, gender affirming care would have been called castration or chemical castration. I've heard that term used a lot with pedophiles who agree to chemical castration as part of parole, or female genital mutilation, or eunuchs, right? Like none of those terms are being used to talk about this in the press. All right. So what is it? What exactly is being banned? So when you read the law says it's only medical stuff, meaning drugs, puberty blockers,
and like surgeries,
right? So the only mental health professionals, so psychologists who don't prescribe drugs are not really affected by this law. They can still, you know, encourage, transsexual type ideas, right? And gender weirdness or ideas, right? But the psychologists who actually prescribe drugs can't, right? And the threat, did you read what the threat was? That you can be sued for malpractice if the treatment you have, if the person regrets the treatment they're given, you can be sued for malpractice, and you are not allowed to buy malpractice insurance to cover these lawsuits, which is a pretty cool. I kind of like that idea. It's like, you better be so sure you're doing the right thing that this person you're treating will never regret this, you know? Okay. So then we saw headlines that Montana had kicked out one of their legislators, right? And this is after the big Kentucky problem where a gun protest broke out in the state legislature and they banned some legislators from coming into the thing again, or the session again. All right. So let's dive deep into Zooey Zephyr's problems. So Zooey Zephyr is the legislator that was banned. And it's a man who's presenting as a woman. By the way, the real problem here is it took me forever to piece out what happened. I had to read no one who's doing journalism on this actually just wants to tell you verbatim the order of events and how this transpired. Okay. But here is what I've been able to piece together, and it took me a frustratingly long time to piece it together. Zooey Zephyr, while debating the new banning or banning gender affirming care law, said very seriously, and there's a video of it, that if you vote for this law, you have blood on your hands. And when you pray, I hope you look down at those hands. Mm-hmm. Right. And the argument there is that Zooey Zephyr is claiming that the kids who suffer from dysphoria who don't get these medical procedures are more likely to commit suicide. That's the argument, or what Zooey Zephyr believes that made this statement relevant, right?
Yeah.
The Republican who kind of is, I don't know, like chair of the legislature session, found this so outside the bounds of like acceptable discourse on the floor that the Zooey Zephyr was banned from speaking. Wasn't banned from attending, wasn't banned from voting, but banned from speaking until Zooey Zephyr apologized for saying that.
Yeah.
Right. A couple of days later, Zooey Zephyr has some supporters charge in and for 30 minutes disrupts the proceedings and chants that they should let Zooey Zephyr speak repeatedly. And then the legislature did one more step and said, you can't even be in the room anymore. And they made Zooey Zephyr sit on a bench outside the room. But Zooey Zephyr still gets to vote, just not allowed to be in the gallery anymore because of the protest.
Yeah.
My take is that civil discourse is kind of important, but this is a bad move.
I mean, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
what,
totally
bad move. For it?
Yeah, no,
totally
I mean, it's, people voted to have Zooey in that room, right? So it's like, do we want to go down that road? One, and I think what was being said was like sincere, but
right. I think if Zooey had started with the protest and not with just the sincere statement, but it started by like bringing in a bunch of protesters into the gallery, then okay, I would kick someone out for that. But if you're going to have someone sincerely say their beliefs and their beliefs are ugly, like they kind of like are accusing you of something, so be it. I mean, that is like you are making very important decisions when you're passing laws, decisions that lock people up for life, that break up families, that deal with abused kids, that sometimes
like it needs to, it needs to be, you need to have it out.
Right. Like, I mean, like, and we need pro-lifers to be able to stand up and say, I think you're killing babies.
Yeah.
Right. And if we want pro-lifers to be able to say that, or even someone who's against gender affirming care, be able to say, I believe that you're castrating children.
Yeah.
And that you're making them into eunuchs and that this has historically been the worst thing you can do. Like if you want them to be able to sincerely say that and bring that type of truth, you have to let someone who has a different idea of what's true sincerely say what they believe.
Yeah. Clark, I was a page in the Maryland State Senate in high school, and at that point, I thought I wanted to work in politics, and these 2 weeks just killed it so fast. But
unlike what Laura says, we do need good Catholics in politics.
I'm saying for me personally, it killed it. But it was a lot of there was just a lot of petty back and forth, and you kind of saw people working out some of their interpersonal problems, like in the Senate, and it was kind of ugly. And I imagine that this was much like that. Right.
Yeah. Like I have a feeling that a lot of those members of the legislature, that Zooey Zephyr really rubbed them the wrong way.
Yeah.
maybe for valid or invalid reasons. And that made banning the person's ability to talk easier.
Yeah. Sorry, this is off the subject, but okay. So when I was there, it was the Ravens had won the Super Bowl. And I don't know if this is popular in other cities, but at that time it was very popular to wear this like purple camo to like a Ravens game, So They had like Friday was like wear your Ravens support in the Senate, So a lot of people wore purple ties, but one guy came in with like his like suit jacket and shirt, but then he wore the purple camo pants. And this guy like pissed other people off in general. So then all of Friday's, what is it? Not hearing or whatever. The meeting that entire day was about whether this guy should be allowed to stay in the room or not because he was not dressed appropriately. So,
all right, well, man, you telling that story does make it sound more imaginable why they banned Zooey Zephyr, but it's still wrong either way. It's still just a waste of time.
100% wrong. Yeah. But I think this is worse. This is worse than what I'm saying because we need people to be able to make these kinds of speeches on both sides, Right. Like it's like a bigger threat than someone wearing the wrong clothes, right? But it was petty, and this could have been petty too,
Great.
Yeah.
Now on to the next enormous story. The U.S. government has been accused of trafficking kids on the U.S. border. All right, let me first start by saying this is not a QAnon accusation, and this is not a Jeffrey Epstein style accusation. It's not that the U.S. government's actually running a brothel or of children or something like that. Yeah. As horrible as that is, would even to say out loud. But it is about, here's the accusation, that the U.S. government is staffing centers to care for these kids or to house these kids and using foster families to care and house these kids. And the U.S. government is not doing background checks on the staff. Or the foster care people. They're not checking them into the registered sex offender registry or anything like that. And a lot of these kids are being lost. Yeah. And by lost, we mean they're not showing up for their next appointments and the U.S. government doesn't know where they are anymore. And this is an enormous amount of people. This is 85,000 people over a couple years have been lost.
Children.
Yeah. Now let's break down what the children is. About 70% of them are over 15 and about 3,600 people or children every year come in it's called unaccompanied minors. And I think they are accompanied. They're just not accompanied by a parent because 3,600 of them a year are less than 6 years old. Yeah. 5 and down. Right. Yeah. So I have a feeling that an adult is with that person when they get to the border and then we're like, this adult's not really the parent. We take the child away. Right. So what's your comment on this, Laura?
Well, just the accusation is not just that the children are being lost, but that we know that some of these people are recruiting these children and then becoming their sponsors to sponsor their coming in, and they're recruiting them and getting them in these kind of relationships where it's they work off their thanks, for the sponsorship of coming into the country. And some of these could be kind of normal labor jobs. Some of it seems like there's some sex trafficking going on. Also that there's people will use, different addresses or whatever to sponsor multiple children. And that some of these children are being delivered to apartment buildings where there's 30 or 40 immigrant children living. So it's not just that we're losing them, but it's known that we're kind of putting them in bad situations.
So let's give a little bit of background on how human trafficking often works. So what human trafficking often does is you take someone where they're from and you make an unrealistic promise about what's on the horizon. You say, hey, come with me to Indonesia or to Saudi Arabia or whatever.
And get out of your horrible situation often, right?
Right. Yeah. But I think we're over I don't think often it's as horrible as we act like. The way we describe some of these countries is we act like that merely living there is abuse, No,
sometimes the horrible situation in some of the trafficking situations is you don't get along with your family. They are so terrible. Come get out of this to this.
But I think sometimes it's also just the grass is greener on the other side. Yeah. And we make a promise of better wages, life in America, or life. This is also happening in the Middle East. It's also happening in other countries. And then you get the person to go and then you take them from a place where they have some control and autonomy to a place where they're very dependent on you. And then you take away their passport and all these other things. And now they are completely, they have no recourse, right? Yeah. And they have to do whatever the person has for them. And if that's prostitution or that's slave labor or whatever, they're completely at the mercy of the person who trafficked them. Right. Yeah. So that's kind of the setup here too, right?
Yeah.
But part of this is a much bigger thing. Illegal immigration is not some like accidental problem, right? It's not like, oh, there's, war-torn countries and these people flee the bullets and they're showing up on our border.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually a system.
Yeah.
Like we have actually constructed an economy that relies on illegal immigration, and we know it happens and we've institutionalized it.
Mm-hmm.
And basically the way it happens is exactly what this story's about, but this story's about the child part of it, not the adult part of it. It's like what we do is we bring someone over the border, and then we have them like need to show up for certain hearings, and we let them out essentially on the equivalent of bail, and they just never come back. Right. And now we're creating this big population in America that does not have rights. Mm-hmm. At least not equal rights. They're second class citizens at best, but they're really not citizens at all. And we have an economic engine that needs them. You know, we need them for agriculture. We need them for these different things, right? And we're okay with this as a nation. When you say you don't want to stop illegal immigration, you're saying you're okay with people in America with no rights doing bad jobs and people having unfair leverage on them.
Yeah.
That's just the system that we currently have, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if you are for only legal immigration, you could be for a lot or you could be for a little, but you're actually bringing people in with rights who have standing and more opportunity within our system, you know? So like this idea of being against illegal immigration, man, I just think I never hear a bishop say this, and I can't claim this is the real church position, but I feel like the church needs to be against illegal immigration, but for immigration.
Yeah.
And then a country needs to manage it. What we have is we've been turning a blind eye for so long that we're dependent on illegal immigration and exploiting people. And the reason why I think this is relevant for these kids is, 70% of these kids are 15 years and up, normal working age in a lot of countries. They're just coming here for the same reason they're all coming here.
Yeah.
And are some of them going to be put in brothels and totally exploited? Yeah. And I think what you should notice is that this is a different narrative than the left or right's offering right now. Like sometimes the right's harping on this, like we're bringing over murderers and all these bad people. And I'm not saying that's not true, because that is partly true. Right. Yeah. But and then the left is acting like you're bringing over really hard workers who, are fleeing some horrible situation. Yeah. Also a little bit true.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But like, it kind of doesn't matter. The thing that's really horrible about the whole thing is we're creating a class of people in our country that has no reason to own car insurance. So like in my old neighborhood, when you got hit by a car, they never stopped. Yeah. Right. They have no reason that they can be easily exploited by cartels, by gangs, by MS-13, whatever. And guess what? They are not going to go to the police for help. So you're basically empowering organized crime again, which we've done a lot of work in America to get rid of. And you're just helping like different industries function in ways that we find abhorrent.
Yeah.
And yes, if we stop this, your food bill will go way up. I'm now ranting, and that's not the purpose of our podcast. I want to tell a story that one time I had a property appraiser come on a real estate deal. And I said that my main thing I do is Simple House ministry. He then explained to me how I should and I could and should use my ministry to traffic humans. He said, what you should do is you should start a home repair side project, claim you have to have these certain immigrants to do it, and then you should bring them over here, pay them nothing, and take their passport. And he literally just explained it to me on the doorstep while he's getting ready to appraise his property.
Why? What?
And he was going to help me set it up. And he was not an immigrant. He was a just normal, guy. Yeah. You would never know. And he clearly saw nothing wrong with it. Isn't that wild?
That's insane. I can't that it's just like, oh, here's an idea.
Here's how you work the loopholes in the law to get this free labor. So anyway,
I know people that have like come here and done well, and they've done well for their family, and it took them a long time to get their things in order, and but the system we have has a lot of, I guess what this is pointing out is that there's a lot of, I don't mean casualties. What's the word?
I think casualties is a pretty good word.
Casualties is right. Yeah. Literal or figurative. Right. But yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on to more weird things. How do we get this podcast more upbeat? Laura and I are going to become so depressed in the middle of our podcast that we have to save this stuff for later. All right, here we go. Ready? All right. This is the 0% conspiracy analysis of Jeffrey Epstein.
What made you want to talk about Jeffrey Epstein this episode?
I don't really have a great reason why this episode, but this has been bothering me. Okay. And I just think we should just mention it out loud.
Okay.
All right. Here are the facts of Jeffrey Epstein that are undisputed. You don't have to buy into any conspiracy in order to believe this. Jeffrey Epstein was doing a lot of stuff. We don't know all the stuff. He was given donations, funding research, etc. But we do know factually that he was systematically abusing underage girls, and he facilitated other people abusing them. And we have 80 plus identified victims. Let's just stick with that. He might have done a lot worse stuff than that even, but we know that. All right.
Yeah.
We know he was murdered in prison. No one seems to buy the official story. No one knows who did it, whatever. We don't need to know. We just know he was murdered in prison. Besides Ghislaine Maxwell, no one has been charged who participated in this abuse ring, even though we have 80 victims and many perpetrators.
Yeah.
We know that no real investigation has happened by Congress or the legal system on the issue. And we know that no serious investigative journalism has been done by any of the major platforms on this issue, and that we have evidence they repressed the story before it broke, before Jeffrey Epstein was originally sent to jail. All right. Those are the 0%. Those are just the accepted facts, right?
Yeah, right.
This is such a depressing episode. All right. There's 3 things you need to know about the reality you live in based on these facts. 1, there are elites in America who are stone cold killers. 2, our elites are truly above the criminal justice system. And 3, the journalists are not keeping the elites in check. They appear more to serve them. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't have a solution for any of that, but that's just like the world we're living in right now. And I wish it would change, you know, but it's unreal. But you need to know that because other people are going to fall like this. And it's like having faith in the system is not the framers' intent of the system. You know, the framers made a system with checks and balances. There's no checks and balances. The checks and balances are not working right now.
Yeah.
We're not working as well as I'd like.
I mean, it seems like we know all these people that were friends with Jeffrey Epstein, and as soon as one of them becomes unpopular, you could go after them maybe. Except you can't because everyone else is implicated then. But I don't know. Yeah, it's weird. It's like why haven't we've like it's just weird that we haven't turned this over, you know. Yeah,
it's weird. It's weird that we still think that the system's operating and that this happened out in the open.
Yeah.
And no one is seriously paused.
Yeah.
I don't want to say no one, but society as a whole hasn't seriously questioned the whole system, given that this happened out in the open.
Yeah.
You know, and they're not the facts are available, you know. The intelligence community. Once again, a checks and balances issue that goes against the whole point of why our government was founded. All right. The intelligence community, particularly the CIA, has admitted that they essentially have an army, an air force, and a navy. And when you read articles about what the U.S. is doing overseas, you discover things by accident that the article wasn't really about. Like about a month ago, there was an article that came out about Russian jets flying over a U.S. base. And I was like, and like acting like that was an act of war or something on the U.S., right? I'm like, well, tell me. So I opened the article because that seemed kind of interesting. Turns out the base is in Syria. We have a base in Syria? We have a base in a civil war in a country that's been in civil war for at least 10 years. Like, if the CIA has an army, air force, and navy, and people are saying that I mean, former CIA people are saying that there are many intelligence people in Ukraine right now fighting on behalf of the Ukrainians. Yeah, quote, they're advising. That's also what we said the Flying Tigers did in China before World War II. They were just advising while flying fighter planes, whatever. Sorry. But there's many people, like, we're basically killing people abroad and never telling even our own people about it.
Yeah.
And then I think we expect certain subcommittees of the Senate and Congress to oversee this very large apparatus that is the intelligence community, and to somehow like keep them from killing the wrong people. And we're supposed to trust this, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, and then when people like whistleblow on it, like Snowden would be an example, like he whistleblows on violating the rights of Americans. We basically run this guy to the ends of the earth, you know?
Yeah. So the kid that just released all that data, like I couldn't find any meaningful pieces about it because it was just all character assassination. It seems like maybe he wasn't that nice of a person, but still. It was like hard to get
it seemed like his like motives weren't necessarily the highest either, but like
right. But I couldn't get just information because every article about it was like very committed to character assassination, you know?
Right.
And it was like, it was hard to get the facts, you know, but.
So I'm trying to like kind of keep this at the most high level, like without getting into any details, but I think everyone would have to acknowledge that we've empowered a group of people with life and death decisions, and they don't have any significant checks and balances.
Right.
And there's no journalism checks and balance. There's no public opinion checks and balance. And they don't have to, there's some Freedom of Information Act at some point. You find out about it. I think we need to change the system, or we're just going to become the evil empire. We're going to become the empire in Star Wars, where you start out as a republic and end up in a full-blown terrible empire. I just think like, here would be this is a very weak suggestion, and this won't like satisfy anyone who's out for blood. But like, I just think like, if the intelligence community kills anyone, the next week they should admit they killed them, say why they killed them, and have to make all that public. And if we don't think it was a sufficient reason to kill someone for, quote, reasons, like security reasons, if we don't find it sufficient, let's just fire them.
Yeah.
You know, they don't have to go to jail. Just take away their job.
Yeah.
You know, right now, we don't even have, that doesn't even seem proportional, you know, to the types of decisions they're making. You know, just lose your job. If you kill the wrong person, just lose your job. You know, that's not even proportional, you know?
Yeah.
But it'd be such a more effective check and balance than what we have right now.
Yeah. Do you think this is true? I feel like there's a kind of like, I think a lot of young people have like no faith in government, you know, or corporate or
that's interesting. And that is a good segment to the next thing. But by the way, I want to say we're kind of pointing out here that these are social justice issues. Right? Like there's all these historical social justice issues, but like if the government is so corrupt that it can kill and make no accounting of it, why would you think they can manage your health care?
Yeah.
Like you have to have a better, more pure organization if you're even going to address the other social justice issues. Right? If you have a government that's trafficking kids or creating second-class citizens as a system, how do you expect them to like run food stamps well?
Yeah.
You know, all right. Kids being skeptical of government. I disagree. The reason is because I talk to the youth all the time. By youth, I'm kind of saying everyone between 18 and like late 20s. And whenever I talk about the right to privacy, the feedback I get is that's an old person concern. Like, why would I even care if I have privacy? Look at all this cool stuff I get from Netflix and everything if I just sign over my privacy, right? And I also find that they just don't care that these things are happening, which that might not be any worse than caring too much that these things are happening that you can't change. But the thing I've kind of come to is like, I have two ways I kind of persuade the youth on this. Like one is to say, do you believe that at some point in your life, you're going to need to speak truth to power?
Wait, can I'm sorry, before you get to that. So that it's like they don't care. So either they trust the government too much, or they think they are powerless in the face of this stupid government or something. And it's like, why? Nothing is shocking. Why bother caring?
Yeah, so let's investigate that. So then I asked them, will you ever need to speak truth to power? Because if they thought they were powerless, they would never speak truth to power.
Yeah.
Right. And they universally think, yeah, like BLM or I will need to speak truth to power. And it's like, if you don't have the right to privacy, you never will be able to.
Yeah.
Like if they can destroy your personal life, whenever you protest something, you're kind of done.
Yeah.
As one person said, you can never be too cynical about power. And I think that's true. The other thing that I get is when I say old man concerns about the intelligence community or something like that, is I find that it's persuasive to say, why does your generation seem to trust big organizations so much? They find that highly insulting, and then they change their tune.
Yeah.
All right. So that's anyway. You know what I'm curious about though is like, we have kids, right? My kids are basically not on the internet.
Yeah.
And I kind of wonder like if I should be careful about whenever the day comes they do get on the internet, if they like never use Gmail or never like why not try to start them out with habits or like a profile that's not as compromised as my own.
Yeah. Well, I think there are parents that are really serious about not putting their kids' pictures on Facebook, etc.
Well, yeah, and they're the parents that own social media companies.
Yeah, right. So that's creepy.
But like, I think what I'd be interested in, if there's a listener out there who's put a lot of thought in this and has like suggestions. And
there is I have a listener that we should interview. He did like
maybe we should interview, or maybe just let people send in some suggestions. Either way.
Right.
I'd be open to suggestions. I just don't want someone coming on like, like when you meet the hardcore organic food person and you say, I will not eat organic peanut butter because I just can't. And they'll be like, no. You might not as well do nothing. Anyway, organic peanut butter like ruined my children on PB&J's.
Because it's bad.
Because like, we prefer just not to eat, Dad. All right.
Okay.
All right. On to the last topic. All right. Something that's a new phenomenon, and I think maybe even the last 20 years, that I feel like humanity's never had to deal with is we are getting really important civilization shaping threats and civilization shaping just things like good or bad have come about that there really is no way to have oversight. And what I mean by that is like this AI situation. It's like the only people who know enough about AI to meaningfully regulate it are the insiders.
Yeah.
Right. The rest of us are just like, hope you do a good job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we can debate nuclear weapons and we can manage it at some level at a national or international or UN level. Right. But like, you don't expect our current legislature to somehow figure out how to regulate AI.
Yeah, like our existential threats are very complicated right now.
Right.
Yeah.
And we don't even have a theory on how we're going to like regulate them. And yet the people within AI are crying out for regulation. You know, they're like recently the Google chief of AI like resigned and was saying he resigned to tell the world more about the threats. What do you want us to do, people?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if you explain the threats of AI, one, good luck if we understand you and believe you. But even if you do, I don't think we can meaningfully regulate it.
Yeah.
Which is just kind of a weird situation. And I think we saw the same situation with this gain of function research in pharmaceuticals. I don't think there's a meaningful way to regulate it.
Yeah.
It's also true of social media. Like the only people who really... We could probably regulate pharma better than we could regulate social media, but the only people really competent to make sure that social media is for the good of society and not for the bad are literally insiders in social media who have all that data.
Yeah, and you'd be asking them to work kind of cross interest,
Yeah, that's the whole idea, that they're in a negative sum game.
Yeah.
Is not in their interest to effectively regulate it. And there's no outside entity that can.
Yeah.
I mean, with social media, maybe you could tell them they have to give all their data to university professors who ask, and then at best, university professors, they'll always be behind the insiders, but maybe they could still come up with general principles like don't show this type of images to people under 18.
Yeah.
Like maybe there's a way they could like regulate some virality or something. But even watching these TikTok trials.
Right. Like one problem is like the algorithm that favors, like a lot of the algorithms favor negative news. And it seems like it has a divisive, effect. So that would be like, that seems like a weird thing to regulate, but like that would be like one approach. Another is just like, how much a specific app like tries to keep you on there. I don't know. It's just like really nebulous things to me to regulate.
I would say there's kind of like three full issues here, right? Like one is complexity, like AI. No one's understanding it who's outside AI right now. Like no one is on top of it enough to be able to regulate it. So that's also true in social media, that they understand virality and what they're trying to get done better than anyone outside does. Yeah. But then the other issue is they lie. They literally just lie. Like we've seen this with Pfizer on gain of function research. We've seen this with Fauci on gain of function research. We've seen this on social media where like Twitter says they do one thing and then Elon Musk had to buy the company and show you they did a different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's also the third issue, which is the one we've known about for a long time, which is capture, where basically the industry gets the regulator to be a member of the industry. I feel like Fauci was captured by pharma. Like his interests were as much or more with pharma than they were for the national health, And I think that that's also true in the airline industry when Boeing was crashing all those jets and the FAA wouldn't ground them.
Yeah.
And basically the EU grounded it and Trump grounded it over the FAA. The FAA should have been the one who was regulating flight, who grounded those airplanes, But anyway, we have these three problems and I would love to hear an answer. Like, once again, general call somewhere. This is not a job for bishops. This is a job for lay people. Somebody tell us a good way to regulate AI.
Yeah.
Love to hear that.
Yeah.
Or everything. Yeah. Regulate us, everything.
No, it is. It's like with the pharmaceutical companies, like a lot of pharmaceutical companies have had to pay huge fines for like engaging in like knowingly deceitful behavior, campaigns, whatever, but right. It's like who we're trusting to take care of us, Yeah.
I think like, let's summarize a little bit of what we've done here. So I think that, I have some conservative friends who I think are right to be suspicious of the Enlightenment. And, I think they're right. I also just don't care because I think that there are certain things in the Enlightenment that have just proven to be good. I think, for example, freedom of speech, a better emphasis on individual rights, property rights, et cetera. All right. One of the other Enlightenment values is like checks and balances in government, and I think a lot of what we're talking here is we're falling short of our own values. Values as freedom of speech, values of checks and balances. I think this is part of the cultural confusion moment we're in right now.
Yeah.
Right. I was kind of interested. I was listening to Larry Chapp on a podcast, and he was talking about wanting the bishops to call out nuclear weapons as inherently immoral. And I think his argument's right. I just don't know if it's useful to have the bishops call it out. But it's also like, hey, Larry, you might be a little bit behind, It's like, what about like gain of function research on viruses? What about AI? Like we are getting so many civilization threatening stuff. Like man was never really a threat to man until recently, or man wasn't a threat to all civilization until recently, and now we're just increasing the vectors of that threat, without a plan. So that's why we support Elon Musk colonizing Mars. So we have a backup plan. Actually, I'm very hopeful overall. God is good and God's got his church and God got all of our reality. Laura agrees. Amen. All right. If you want more of this type of negative analysis, you can like, subscribe, and comment. Thank you for listening to the Simpleton Podcast. Good luck, Ben, editing this episode.
Bye, Clark.
Bye.
Ben, I don't like my hair today, so if you could just like superimpose a new hairstyle.